Today, we're diving into something pretty wild, a new theory called the Brain Kernel Model. And trust me, it completely flips the script on how we think our minds work. It suggests the secret to consciousness isn't in some kind of computer code, but in the actual physical stuff our brain is made of. Just think about how we talk about our thoughts. We have hard problems, heavy thoughts. We say an idea is flexible or that someone's beliefs are rigid. We use these physical words all the time, right? We never really think about it. But what if they're not just metaphors? Well, that's exactly what the Brain Kernel Model, or BKM for short, is getting at. It proposes something that sounds almost crazy at first, that these physical descriptions are tied to the literal physical reality of our brain tissue. That our minds are shaped deeply and profoundly by the material properties of the brain itself. So, to really get a handle on this, we first need to talk about the main idea we've all been running with for decades, and why it might actually be holding us back. For so long, the go-to metaphor has been the brain is a computer, right? It processes information, it runs on some kind of neural code, it has memory storage. But the brain kernel model says, scrap that. Let's start over. It says the brain isn't a computer, it's an active physical material. It doesn't process info, it manages activity. It doesn't run on code, it works by physical constraint. And memory? It's not stored somewhere. It's literally embedded in the physical history of the material itself. Okay, so what's the secret sauce here? What's this new model actually built on? Well, it all comes down to one really cool, key physical property of our brain tissue. And that property is called viscoelasticity. Now, I know that word sounds super technical, but stick with me, because the idea is actually something you already know. Think about memory foam. If you poke it, it bounces back fast, right? That's the elastic part, like a rubber band. But if you leave your head on it all night, it holds that shape for a while. That's the viscous part, kind of like honey. It has both properties. The brain kernel model argues that our brain tissue behaves in exactly the same way. So, this whole thing really boils down to three huge revolutionary ideas. First, forget hardware and software. The brain is one single, unified thing. Second, your mind isn't shuffling around abstract symbols like a computer does. Nope, it's all about stabilized patterns of physical activity. And third, and this one is a doozy, every single thing you experience literally leaves a physical mark, a history of stress and strain in your brain tissue, shaping who you are and how you think from that moment on. And here is where this gets really powerful. This one core idea, the brain as a physical material, can suddenly explain so many different things about us. It can help us understand everything from a simple thought to our complex languages and even our weirdest dreams. So what even is a thought in this model? Well, here it is. It's just a pattern of brain activity that fits the current physical shape of your brain tissue. It follows the paths of least resistance left by your history. That explains why some thoughts are easy, right? They just flow. But other ideas feel forced because they're literally pushing against the grain of your brain's physical history. It even suggests some ideas might be, for you, literally unthinkable because they would require too much physical change. And this model gives us an amazing way to think about two extremes of our consciousness: dreaming and language. Dreaming, it says, is a low-constraint state. The strict rules are off, and brain activity just kind of flows along the existing physical pathways. That's why dreams are so visual and symbolic and weird. Language is the complete opposite. It's a high-stiffness system. All its rules, grammar, syntax, they act like rigid channels that force our thinking into stable, predictable patterns and get rid of all the ambiguity. But here's the kicker. These two states aren't in separate boxes. They're in a constant dance, a feedback loop. Our floaty, dreamlike states create all this raw, symbolic stuff. Then our superstructured language system jumps in, and it acts like a filter. It names things, narrows them down, and stabilizes them into meaning we can actually share with each other. It's a cycle. The symbols from our dreams feed language, and language in turn shapes our symbol. Now, this whole idea doesn't just stop with one person's brain. It gets bigger. We can actually scale it up to understand why different cultures around the world can think and act in such fundamentally different ways. BKM suggests that cultures tend to lean in one of two directions. You've got symbolic dominant cultures, and you've got language dominant ones. Just look at the comparison here. Symbolic cultures pass on meaning through myths, rituals, images. They're okay with ambiguity, and dreams are often a big deal, maybe even a communal experience. On the other hand, language-dominant cultures rely on written texts, laws, arguments.
They want things to be explicit and clear. They have a low tolerance for ambiguity, and dreams, well, they're mostly seen as a private, personal thing.
And hey, these aren't just abstract ideas. You can see this play out in the real world. Many indigenous oral traditions are deeply, deeply symbolic dominant. And on the flip side, modern Western cultures, especially in law or academia, they're textbook examples of language-dominant systems, where everything has to be written down and argued with precision. So this leads to a completely new definition of culture. Get this. According to the Brain Kernel Model, culture isn't just a bunch of shared ideas we have in our heads. It's an emergent physical pattern. It's what happens when a whole population of brains, all shaped by similar experiences and environments, interact with each other. It's a physical stabilization at a massive scale. Okay, so let's land the plane here. We've gone through a lot. What does this new model of the brain really mean for us? What's the big takeaway? Well, for starters, it offers some really compelling explanations for things that have always been a bit mysterious. That feeling of a rigid belief? That might be actual physical rigidity. The strange, symbolic logic of dreams? That's the brain in its low-constraint, free-flowing state. It could even explain how trauma can stick with us physically, even if the explicit memory is gone. In creativity, that might just be what happens when we let our brain relax its constraints and physically reorganize itself. When you boil it all down, the brain kernel model is asking us to make a huge shift, to stop seeing our minds as computers running software and to start seeing them as what they are, living, breathing, physical systems. Every single moment of your life has left a literal, physical trace, carving out the landscape that your future thoughts will travel on. And that leaves us with one last pretty heavy question to chew on. If the very terrain of our mind, the actual physical pathways, are shaped by a lifetime of history, how free are our thoughts really?